All right, Saagar, what are we looking at?
Well, perhaps the most irksome thing about the debate around Ukraine funding is how completely unmoored it is from reality. Ukraine, which is one of the most corrupt countries on earth, is suddenly the front line of democracy. We should support Ukraine also so that we don't have to fight a future war with Russia. Or we must supply Ukraine now because they're right on the cusp of victory. Now, I've done multiple monologues about those first two propositions and why they're ridiculous, but let's really focus on the final part here. What exact difference would another $66 billion to Ukraine actually make on the ground? Let's focus on some major developments in the Ukrainian military to see who exactly that we are supplying. Just days before the Senate passed the Ukraine aid bill, President Zelensky fired the overwhelmingly popular head of the Ukrainian military forces, General Valery Zaluzhnyi. The critical difference between the two was Zaluzhnyi's crime of telling the truth. The split between the two happened after he was too frank in a recent Economist interview, where he admitted that the war was a stalemate between Ukraine and Russia, and that absent some major change in conditions on the ground, very little would change in the future. For this crime, Zelensky not only fired him and eliminated a man with a 92% approval rating in the country who could plausibly have challenged him for leadership in the future if things went south. In his place, he has now put in a new top general named Alexander Syrsky. Syrsky's pedigree in Ukraine is this. He led a long time ago two successful counteroffensive in the early days of the Ukraine war, but since has now earned a nickname inside the country by the armed forces, the people he now commands. That nickname is the Butcher. He has that nickname because he is the one responsible for the idiotic and murderous last stand in the city of Bakhmut earlier last year. Syrsky, who has educated at the military academy in Moscow, has embraced fully Soviet-style war of attrition tactics in a war which he put on full display in the Bakhmut battle. The problem is that he forgot he does not have the Soviet industrial might at his back, and he wasted tens of billions of dollars of U.S. weapons, ammunition, and perhaps most importantly, thousands of Ukrainian professional soldiers' lives, only to end up losing the entire battle. The so-called Butcher shows us no signs that he's changing his tactics, which means this: an extra $66 billion to Ukraine is a check to this man to continue throwing Ukrainian lives into a meat grinder with no discernible goal. For a preview of what we could be funding if any dollars continue to flow into this country, look at what Syrsky is doing right now. Ukraine is throwing its best troops into the city of Advika in the hopes of staving off a so far successful Russian offensive. However, analysts are noting that losses sustained so far by the Ukrainian forces in the battle indicate they are being billeted all together, the Ukrainians, in barracks very tightly, despite frequently being targeted successfully by Russian forces. The surmised reason is dark. They all have to be kept together to stop them from running away. In effect, they are prisoners of their state, being forced to defend the city in old-school tactics with no choice to flee of their own. Consider that at this point, most of the able-bodied patriotic men in Ukraine are either dead or maimed for life. The average age inside the Ukrainian military at this point is somewhere between 40 and 50 years old. Consider that average means that there are many who are much older than that. Furthermore, multiple reports now indicate that Ukraine is resorting to literally kidnapping men off the street, previously exempt from military forces, and forcing them to join up. More so, it is clear the Ukrainian enthusiasm to fight is waning amongst the surviving able-bodied men. An estimated 650,000 men of conscription age have fled the country illegally. I can personally attest through my own recent travels in Hungary and Austria, the streets are crawling with Ukrainians, and it is an open secret that rich Ukrainian men have been living outside the country now in luxury for 2 years straight. They have no intention to go back and fight. What brings us to a final point. Ukraine does not have a major weapons and ammunition problem. It has a manpower problem. Every dollar and bullet shipped east is going to prolong a conflict with the most predictable end of all time. The only question, how much more bloodshed and how many more poor and mentally disabled people will be caught in the crossfire in the meantime? The humanitarian thing to do is to stop military aid and pressure both sides to a negotiated solution. President Putin of Russia recently told Tucker Carlson that if aid does stop flowing to Ukraine, he would consider a peace deal with the United States. Maybe he's lying. There's only one way to find out, though. Unfortunately, this was immediately shot down by the Biden administration, who seem to believe that there is some rosy alternative ahead where the grim truth is now clear for us all to see. Ukraine needs to accept their victory is being able to survive with intact territory at all. The sooner that we relieve them of their delusions of grandeur, the sooner that we can restore peace, not only to the world, but to save untold numbers of Ukrainian lives. I mean, Krystal, it's stunning.
Hey guys, obviously I had a lot of thoughts on what Saagar had to say there. So if you want to see my thoughts on this monologue and every other Saagar monologue, make sure you subscribe at breakingpoints.com.